Hey guys, hello. And today we're going to be debunking the Anunnaki movie.
Level of reality, the essence of cymatics is present. Now, let us pretend that
He's
there are ancient gold mines. Many people today believe they are. It would appear that with a deep understanding of the phenomenon of cymatics, that the Anunnaki were able to mine gold or perhaps move it around using the frequencies of the earth, and thus gold mines were designed very specifically to resonate with the sounds of the planet, allowing them to do their work more easily. We know today that sound levitation is a thing, and may even be a great key to flying vehicles. One day. Is it possible that these sites are the ancient remnant of sound levitation and like uses on an absolutely massive scale? Some sites, such as this one, are even more unique, having seemingly constructed to very precise ratios. I know that so far we've been drawing all of these miners with pickaxes, and we're going to continue to, but please know that this is for the ease of telling the story for us today. To these ancient miners, they'd probably think pickaxes were a fairly limited and primitive technology. Regarding these ruins, the man responsible for leading the research on the electromagnetic fields of these sites is Michael Tellinger. Who wrote the following about his experience there. I have measured these spectacular energy and electromagnetic waves, and therefore do not hesitate to make these claims. The fact that these circles are all connected by the stone channels makes it very clear to any scientist who works with electricity or energy that the stone circle complex is a giant energy generating that was most likely used in the mining and processing of gold on a scale unimaginable to us today. From Michael's work, he suggests that there was a civilization living at the tip of South Africa, mining gold for nearly 200,000 years. A civilization which at some point completely and suddenly vanished from the radar. Now, for those of us today who believe these stories are true, we must ask the question, what in the blazes were ancient primitive humans doing with all of that gold? What did we find? The general consensus is that at this stage in human evolution, we were purely hunter-gatherers. It was not until after 9,000 500 BCE that the 8 so-called founder crops of agriculture appear, and these ruins are dated significantly older than this. We don't say that gold is a very soft metal, and not really something that we could use like other metals, certainly not if we were so primitive, as most of the world's historians agree that we were. Critics often put forth against Michael Tellinger and his claims that these sites could not possibly be gold mines because there is no ancient artifact that we know of today made of gold that exists before 4600 BCE. Then again, if the Anunnaki were shipping the gold off to their planet or wherever, it would make sense that humans wouldn't be crafting things out of it anyways. It is most certainly an extremely unique puzzle, made even more amazing by the fact that Sitchin wrote the Anunnaki were mining gold in Southeast Africa way back in 1976, long before the discovery of these sites truly came to light. All of the people who who claim that Sitchin doesn't even know how to read the tablets and all of his interpretations are wrong, I pose the question, how is this even possible? Now, I know what you might be thinking. Michael Tellinger read a Sitchin book, went to Africa, and then claimed some old ruins that he found were gold mines. And you know what? Maybe he really was looking for them. However, if we that he is correct, and that the energetic and cymatic readings of the site truly do indicate that they were gold mines, then it really does call us to reevaluate everything we think we know about origins. The back and forth between historians and archaeologists on this, and even the after the Baconi people, reminds me of exactly the same thing that happened around the age of the Sphinx. Today, Egyptologists stand definitively behind the idea that the Sphinx was built around 2500 BC by the Pharaoh, despite significant archaeological evidence, such as weather patterns of the Sphinx, that prove it is significantly older. Know about human origins. The back between historians and archaeologists, and even naming the ruins people, reminds me of the exact same around the age of the Sphinx. Today, Egyptologists stand definitively behind the idea that the Sphinx was built around 2500 BC by the Pharaoh, despite significant archaeological evidence, such as the of the Sphinx, that prove significantly older. At least 12,000, if not 5,000 years old. The way that skeptics treat Sitchin and his work, you'd think he was just throwing darts at a map, and wherever they landed was wherever he pegged the story to take place. But if those ruins truly are the remnants of gold mines, then we have to ask the question, was Sitchin actually able to read the tablets better than everyone else in history? Today, most historians the Sumerian tablets don't speak of gold mines at all. That Sitchin essentially just made it up. In the 12th century, Sitchin explains his reasoning, which actually has to do with Apsu, also written as Abzu. If you recall, Apsu is regarded as the aquifers under Mesopotamia, and Sitchin translated him to actually mean the sun. But after Enki took the throne, Apsu became a location rather than a deity. The Sumerian term Abzu, which scholars have accepted to mean watery deep, requires a fresh and critical analysis. Literally, the term meant primeval deep source, not necessarily of waters. According to Sumerian grammatical rules, either of two syllables of any term could precede the other without changing the word's meaning, with the result that Abzu and Zuab meant the same thing. The latter spelling of the Sumerian term enables identification of its parallel in Semitic languages. For Zahab has always meant and still means precious metal, specifically gold in Hebrew and its sister languages. The Sumerian pictograph for Abzu was that of an excavation deep into the earth, mounted by a shaft. Thus, Ea was not the lord of an indefinite watery deep, but the god in charge of the exploitation of Earth's minerals. This is a very curious correlation, considering that gold is often called the royal metal, sacred in ancient times, and is the metal most commonly associated with the sun. Apsu, firstly written as the sun, and then a physical metal commonly identified as the metal of the sun and sun gods. Wowsy. But you know what? Our discoveries don't end there. Let's now shift the conversation for a moment to explore one more curious relationship between what we know today about human history and the story from these tablets. There is a colloquial mitochondrial Eve theory that scientists first presented in the early 1980s. By 1987, a publication by scientists Kahn, Stone King, and Wilson revealed that the matrilineal source of our common DNA lineage dates back between 140 and 200,000 years ago. To be clear, the original nomenclature for this finding was Lucky Mother, but when a publication in Science titled The Unmasking of Mitochondrial Eve was released to the world, the name Eve stuck in the minds of the masses. Just to make sure there's an understanding of these results, they refer to a common matrilineal mitochondrial line, a common root for all humans. What's so interesting here, and why this research has relevance to this part of the story, is that the first collective person happened to come from the same exact time frame and valley that humans were mining gold. The latest research on this from 2013 serves only to create an even more robust data set to support the original date and region of mitochondrial Eve. Isn't it so remarkable? The original theory, and still prevalent out of Africa theory of human origin, just so happens to point to the same valley where the Sumerian records say that it all started. Coincidence? You decide. Let's bring ourselves back to the story, sometime around 2 to 300,000 years ago, when Enki created humanity. If you're knowledgeable of Greek mythology, this part of the story sounds very familiar to Prometheus, the ancient titan who created humanity out of clay. Like Prometheus, Enki stands up for the human race when in conflict with the gods, most of all, Enlil. From a more scientific perspective, the tablets seem to depict Enki as a geneticist who used some some form of advanced technology to clone and create this new kind of human. There's even tablet images that depict a pattern that looks an awful lot like a DNA strand. Despite Enki's work, Enlil was still in charge of the operation, would command Enki to modify the genome as he required. Sitchin explains that the combination of earthly clay mixed with divine blood to create a prototype of man is firmly established by the Mesopotamian texts. We also see this reflected in Genesis 2, where Elohim fashioned Adam from the clay of the soil and blew in his nostrils the breath of life. Adam turned into a living being with a soul. The Hebrew term commonly translated as soul here is nefesh, that elusive spirit that animates a body. And the physical form dies. Interestingly, the term Adama, after which the name Adam was coined, meant not any earth or soil, specifically dark red. The Hebrew name for the color red is also Adam, which stems from the word for blood. This name Adam employed a Sumerian play of double meanings. Adam means several things: earth, one made of dark red soil, and especially one made of blood. The text also speak of attempts to craft a perfect primitive worker, which along the way resulted in deformed humans created by Enki and the mother goddess Ninhursag, which you might remember from her other name in the Babylonian story, Damkina. Essentially, in an attempt to perfectly match the genome of their human prototypes with the Anunnaki, there were some mistakes that were made along the way through a process of trial and error. Ninhursag also has another name called Ninmah, and in one particular ancient story called Enki and Ninmah, describes a bunch of awkward failures. In the story, Ninmah produces a man who could not bend his outstretched weak hands, one who could not close his eyes, one with both feet broken, one who was just an idiot, a man who could not hold back his urine, a woman who could not bear children, and a being who had no sex organs at all. With each new failed attempt at a proper functioning human, Enki finds a place for them in society, often as servants for the king. Sitchin theorized that the story recalls the first phase of the existence of a being like licensed image of gods, but incomplete in some ways, including sexually, lacking in quote-unquote knowing. However, they were still used for the Anunnaki's plan as servants. Shape and form. According to this theory, for many thousands of years, Enki continually cloned and created new proto-humans who would grow up to become minders. However, these beings were sterile. They could not reproduce. During the period in which they grew into adults, these first humans were placed in an area where they could be contained and not leave. Sitchin believed that it was only when they grew up enough to be useful to the Anunnaki that they were transported to the mining area in Africa. I will also fully acknowledge that there's some discrepancy in this idea though. The story of Enki Ninmah specifically says, Ninmah took clay from the top of the Abzu in her hand, and she fashioned from it first a man who could not bend his outstretched weak hands. The use of the location Abzu here though, suggests that the creation of humanity actually took place in Africa, which also aligns better with the mitochondrial Eve discovery that we looked at earlier. Perhaps then it's just the other way around, and that after fashioning these servants, they were found useful to the Anunnaki in other ways than mining, and were transported to Mesopotamia to help work in and maintain Eridu or other locations nearby. Either way, it's believed that the location where these slaves worked in Mesopotamia was a place called Eden, which is the root word for the biblical Garden of Eden. There's a few ideas about this translation though. Today, most modern scholars translate the Sumerian term Eden as steppe or plain, suggesting it refers to a large field, I guess. Sitchin, on the other hand, translated Eden to mean home or abode of the righteous ones. At any rate, it's what happened in this location where things get intense. This translation though. During the period in which he grew into adults and his outstretched weak hands. The use of the location Abzu here though, suggests that the creation of humanity actually took place in Africa, which also aligns better with the mitochondrial Eve discovery that we looked at earlier. Perhaps then it's just the other way around, and that after fashioning these servants, they were found useful to the Anunnaki in other ways than mining, and were transported to Mesopotamia to help work in and maintain Eridu or other locations nearby. Either way, it's believed that the location where these slaves worked in Mesopotamia was a place called Eden, which is the root word for the biblical Garden of Eden. There's a few ideas about this translation though. Today, most modern scholars translate the Sumerian term Eden as steppe or plain, suggesting it refers to a large field, I guess. Sitchin, on the other hand, translated Eden to mean home or abode of the righteous ones. At any rate, it's what happened in this location where things get intense. A dispute was growing betwixt the gods. You see, Enlil is often described as the oppressor of humanity, a bit of a patriarchal overlord who commanded the slaves. Enlil said not to really care about humanity though. He just wants to mine gold, destroy humanity, and go home. Tablets even say that he orchestrates a massive flood to wipe out humanity. A subject that we'll get to shortly. Enki, on the other hand, is described as humanity's champion. Enki cares about humanity and sees them a bit like his children. And while they've been producing all of these sterile slave humans to mine gold and till the fields and all that stuff, in secret, he has been continually refining and developing the human genome to produce the perfect human, one who is capable of reproduction and living as its own sovereign species. This story says that Enki finally discovers the perfect genetic pairing and that a real human is achieved. On the subject of the creation of the first humans and this land of Eden, there are two Sumerian myths I'd love to share with you. The first being Enki and Ninhursag, and the Atrahasis. Now, the story of Enki and Ninhursag is a bit long, so we're just gonna summarize the essence of it here. Basically, in the story, there is a paradise land called Dilmun. The story begins with what you might call not safe for work content. So I'm just gonna gloss over that for now and say that eventually, Enki eats 8 unique plants in paradise land. Unfortunately, the goddess Ninhursag considers this act to be a terrible sin. In a way, these are a bit like forbidden plants, and so she causes 8 of Enki's body parts, including one of his ribs, to suffer. Soon, he is on the brink of death. Enlil, along with a magical talking fox who I'm imagining was just adorable, takes up Enki's cause and persuades Ninhursag to relent. Ninhursag returns to Enki and asks him 8 times, "My brother, what part of you hurts you?" And he responds with the various parts of his body that hurts. As Ninhursag heals his body, 8 different deities emerge in the healing process, and the one who emerges in the healing of his rib is the goddess Ninti, whose name means both Lady of the Rib and Lady who makes life. As you can tell, there are tremendous parallels to this story of Eve being created from Adam and Eve in Genesis 2, as this is its likely origin. Further, Eve in Hebrew is Hawa and is most commonly believed to mean living one or source of life. What I find especially interesting about this is that in the Sumerian story, the characters on who Adam and Eve are based on are both deities.